Hello, I'm John Adams. Today I'm with Clare Shaw to discuss child bereavement and how she intends to help children who suffer bereavements in the future. So thanks Claire for coming in to see us today.
Thank you for having me.
So obviously your area is child bereavement, and obviously you've got your two books, which is Love Will Never Die and A Mind Full of Grief. Before we go into those, was there a reason that got you to do these books, and what's your background in this, please?
Background on bereavement, so this was actually my second book, because the first book came, it's a deployment book from when my husband worked away. And on the back of that, and going into schools and talking to teachers about that, I started with the idea of writing a bereavement book, because I was 11 when my brother had died, and back 30 something years ago there wasn't any help. There was nothing out there that I could use as a resource, and I wanted to do something that might help. So going into school with the deployment book, I was talking to teachers about what they use, and there are some beautiful books out there that help and that they use with the children, but they said, a lot of when they do read to a child who's just lost somebody, some of the books are so metaphorical that the children would sit and say, why have you just read that to me?
I get it,
I don't understand. So she said, the way that I write very direct, and I write from the child's point of view. And she said something like that would be perfect. So I thought, okay, I'll give it a go. Went home to my husband and he went, oh, there's no need for it. Because he was in his early 20s when he first had a close bereavement. So he didn't, and none of his friends had lost anybody close to them when he went through school. So he didn't feel there was going to be a need for it. But there was something in me that wanted to
desire to do it,
massively. And then I started to research child bereavement and the statistics around it, and how many children do lose parents. And I mean, there aren't statistics for siblings, aunties and uncles and everything else, but there is a real need to help. So I wrote that.
No, that's fantastic. As I said, and we give it out to lots of families here at Clare and Phillips. So back to, again, like the schools then, because obviously I lost my mum when I was 12, similar age to when you lost your brother. And I found in my secondary school I just started that there was no sort of support from a bereavement level at all. My dad wrote to the school, and it didn't actually get through to the teachers in my year what had happened. So again, things have progressed. But as we discussed before, you and I think you're still relying on proactive schools, and that's the concern. I know we've spoken again about my sort of goal with the national curriculum and seeing that added in there. Do you think if there was discussions prior to you losing your brother, do you think that would have helped you at all? Anyway.
I think an understanding, even on a very simple level, a very basic level, just to know that that's the one sure thing in life. To know that everybody and everything at some point will die, and what then happens. Because I was living in this bubble, as all children do until it happens. You never consider it. You would never think about it.
I see adults now in their, say, 50s and 60s that'll be arranging a funeral for the first time, having complete meltdowns because they've never even considered or even looked at death before. So I think if we can get it into schools to try and sort of give those simple tools that are in place, not only will it help the children who are like us, who suffer the loss, help the peers in the classroom, help the teachers, potentially from a society point of view, but also later in life as well. Some basic awareness in place. So I think together it could be really, really interesting. So the books itself then, what do they cover and how do they help children?
Love Will Never Die is very much for younger children, primary age children. and it covers the fact that someone they love's died.
Yeah.
It doesn't refer to anyone specific. It's just somebody they love. It talks about the funeral and that there will be a funeral, and encourages them to ask questions, because that's one of the biggest things. When Andrew died, I was too frightened to ask Mum and Dad because they were grieving, and I could see that they were upset. And once I cried in front of my mum, and she then cried, which I now know is just very natural. But I felt I'd upset her. So I then never spoke. I never talked about it. I never cried in front of them. And so I've made it really clear in there that it's okay to ask questions and to talk about the loved one and to cry. There's a packet of tissues in the book, because I think that is one of the most important things.
It's okay to do that.
Yeah, you've got to be able to do it, because when it's bottled up, it causes long-term problems. I've had terrible issues with mental health throughout my lifetime because of it.
Well, I think, again, as a parent, it's our sort of in our nature to try and protect our children. So like we try and do all we can, and like when I arrange a funeral, I noticed more and more the parents trying to sort of protect children from being involved in the arrangements. And I always say to the families, if they want to be involved, I promise you I won't say anything that's going to cause great upset. I will go through everything at real slow pace for them. And whenever they do get involved, the parents are always so surprised how well and how much it helps them. It's like, well, there's a serious positive there.
Massive.
It's discussions though, isn't it? And that's what the books do, is create discussions and awareness again.
And families have said where, quite often, like you say, the families protect the children so they don't talk about it in front of them. I've had feedback from families who've said, actually, once they've started to read the book, it's opened up the conversation for the whole family. So they have actually sat down and talked about the funeral together, rather than the parents arranging it and the child being left to one side. So it has really helped in that way. Because I think the more open you are with the children and the more honest you are with the children, the easier it becomes. Because if they don't see the process, there's less understanding, and if they're only getting drips and drops of information, they'll struggle more because they don't understand.
And then also what that results in is a bitterness when they get older. The amount of adults I speak to now who are sort of protected away, and they are certain. I can think of people now that weren't allowed to go to the funeral because parents are trying to do their best, and that's what we can try and do is our best.
And I understand. I do understand that. And trying to protect your children is the
key thing.
It's what you do, isn't it? No, I think honesty is absolutely the best policy. Definitely. And then the next book you've done, you say, after that is for teenagers. Teenagers and young adults, actually. Because when I started to go to different conferences with Love Will Never Die, and the main question I got asked was, have you got anything like this for teenagers? And I'd be at education conferences, bereavement conferences, and it didn't matter where I was, that was always asked, because there was nothing. There's such a gap in the market for teenagers, and actually they're probably one of the age group that needs the most help, because they're going through so many changes anyway. Their whole lives are a mix of emotions, and so to throw in a bereavement as well, and then they're probably more likely to cover up how they're feeling. So therefore there's a lot more going on inside that needs to come out. So again, it's written in a format that's very blunt, I suppose, and it's very matter of fact. I had my teenage son read it at every edit to make sure that I wasn't getting it wrong. And it just explains everything. So each page has a dictionary definition at the top, and each page finishes with a quote. Anything from Shakespeare to Kanye West, I believe, is in there as well. So there's a grand range of quotes in there. But there are things like, bereavement, grief, journaling, all those things. So it's all explained. And then the process of the funeral and what grief can feel like. Not everyone's the same, but it gives an idea of the range of emotions you might go through within 5 minutes.
Yeah.
You know, it's not something that one day you'll be happy and one day you'll be sad.
Yeah.
You know, particularly with teenagers whose hormones are going up and down.
Yeah.
They can change.
That's the key thing. People know there's not a sort of set road for you. It's always going to be different. Everyone's different.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And also, stepping back ever so slightly, when we said about protecting children by not talking to children, children will model their behaviour on the adults around them. So if you don't talk about the person who's died in front of the child, or, you know, if ever they enter the room, everyone goes quiet, or, you know, you don't show your emotions in front of the child, that's how they learn to deal with death.
Yeah.
So as they get older, they don't grieve properly.
Yeah.
And it's a whole muddle. The cycle carries on, because they then won't talk to their children about it, who then won't talk to their children about it. So you think you're protecting the child, but actually you're modelling really not so good behaviour.
Yeah.
On how to deal with something so serious.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting. I think sometimes I do think actually they are making some progress.
Yeah.
Even like Disney now are bringing out films, aren't they? They touch on bereavement.
There's death in every Disney film.
yeah, that's a good point actually. That's a good point.
And particularly when Olaf died, that was really terrible. Please don't put that in the video. Sorry.
No, it's good.
I was heartbroken.
Okay, so moving forward then, what's your plan next? Do you plan to do any more books after this? Different age groups, different sort of scenarios, different types of deaths?
I have been asked to write a book about pet bereavement.
Okay.
Which
I'm
not sure whether to go for or not.
Yeah.
It was somebody I met originally. It was somebody I met at NFE in 2019.
I met you, yeah.
And he ran a pet cemetery.
Okay.
And he said, "You've got to do something. Please do something." And I've thought about it a lot, but I'm not sure whether.
Well, I think again though, like even with pets, you know, they are like family, aren't they? Dogs.
Yes. Oh gosh, yeah.
So.
And the other one I wanted to touch on, which again I'm a little nervous of, is bereavement of a suicide.
Yeah.
Because from my own experience, I lost 2 uncles to suicide, and having lost my brother, my grandparents, friends. One of my uncles we understood, and he'd left everything laid out, everything was perfect. One of them we had no idea, and it was a complete shock, and that's been the hardest death I've ever felt I've had to try to deal with. Yeah. And I don't think I'd ever reconcile it. It's really hard. I
think with that, growing up, I always struggled to sort of to witness, obviously being connected to Perry and Phillips.
Yeah.
When I lost my own mum, I sometimes felt quite bitter by it, but as I got older, you come to realise how much of an illness it is, and actually the stigma around it. I think you hear people say people who commit suicide are selfish, and that's like, it's so unfair. Like people don't understand what's around it. So I think that'd be really, really interesting to do that. Obviously, it's so sensitive, isn't it? To be so delicate.
Yeah, really difficult. And I think that's what's scaring me about doing it. But there is also a huge part of me that knows
it could be really, really helpful.
Yeah,
really
massively.
Helpful.
So potentially,
no, that's fantastic.
I might look at that at some point.
It's really, it's all positive stuff, Claire. So thank you for what you're doing and the work so far. So your other books, then, Claire, you discuss about deployments for armed forces.
Yeah.
So being ex-Royal Navy and having a few deployments myself, how does that work? What do your books cover regarding deployments?
Again, so that one obviously came about when my husband was away.
Yeah.
And at the time, my boys were 9 and 6.
Yeah.
9-year-old, he's always been Mr. Laid Back. Nothing seems to ever affect him. But my 6-year-old struggled massively. And I hadn't realised what it was that was bothering him. And then I went out to see my husband and happened to sit on an aircraft with an educational psychologist. Okay. We were chatting.
Useful.
Very useful. Yeah. We were having a few drinks on the aeroplane and chit-chatting, and told her all about Ozzy and the troubles he was having. And she told me all sorts of ways to help and why he was behaving that way, and what I could do to help him and to turn him back around. And on the way home, I was sat on my own and I wrote a poem. Yeah. And it turned out that it was this, Daddy's gone away with work. and it incorporated all the things that the educational psychologist had told me. Again, it's got the packet of tissues in, and an envelope for if Daddy sends anything home. And I happened to put it on Facebook and say to my friends, would anyone read it? You know, is it worth me doing anything with this? And a friend of mine had just started as a deputy head at a local school. I said, would you come and read it with my forces children? So I ended up with some pictures I'd found on the internet, sellotaping these pieces of paper together and taking in an A4 book that was just printed on my own printer. And the kids loved it.
Amazing.
So I went, okay.
Yeah.
So I ended up doing that, and I've got a National Forces charity who they run a scheme where they give free books to children of deployed parents, and so they use it with that. And I've got schools. In fact, I've just dropped off a dozen at a local school this morning because there's been a deployment locally. So that one. I did a mummy version as well, because obviously it's not just Daddy who goes away. And again, it doesn't mention the forces, so it could be used by anybody who has to go away for work.
Periods of time away,
and it's all the little hints and tips that I was told about that I then did and worked. So
for myself, fortunately, when I was serving for my 8 years, I didn't have kids at the time. But with the guys that, and obviously ladies as well, that did have children, I always wondered how they did it really, such long periods of time.
It's hard work.
So with that then, with your books on deployments and grief and bereavement awareness, is there a connection or a correlation between the two, deployments and grief or bereavement?
I think it is. I think any separation, so when a family splits up, it's a form of bereavement. So I guess, you know, a parent having to go away, the child, for the first few times at least, would go through similar feelings, I would imagine, as a bereavement.
A hole.
But then they come back. But then they go again. You know, it's such a strange world that they live in. It must. I couldn't imagine it. Deployment after deployment after deployment. I think it's so hard.
No. Full admiration for these people doing it.
Absolutely.
No. Well, thank you so much for coming in, Claire, to speak to us. I think what you're doing is fantastic. So positive for people, and hopefully we can try and get your books to people that aren't subject to bereavements, to potentially try and help with prevention rather than just when something happens. But thank you so much for what you're doing from the whole industry really. We hope to see more of your stuff out there for all society.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claire.
For having me.
Take care.